1. The question that modern building science can't answer. Look up for a moment. Really look. Those beams above you, darkened by smoke, scarred by time, carved by centuries of winter air, are still standing after 7, 8, even 900 years. And in the first 15 seconds of this story, I want to plant a question in your mind that will not leave you for the rest of the video. Why is this wood still alive when our modern lumber dies young? Walk into any medieval hall or church and you immediately feel it, the weight of the past resting on timber that seems far too old to be real. These beams survived storms, livestock, human breath, leaking roofs, thick smoke, and endless cycles of damp winter air. Yet they remain firm and strong. Now compare that to the world we build today. 68% of modern wooden homes need structural repairs before they reach 40 years old. Deckboards twist apart, floor joists rot, barn beams sag and collapse. Timber that should protect a family for generations barely survives a single one. So what changed? What vanished? Because history leaves clues if you know where to look. And the uncomfortable truth is this: medieval wood lasts longer, not because the trees were better, and not because the climate was kinder, but because medieval builders used a hidden step in their construction process, a step we completely abandoned when industrial speed replaced long-term thinking. Once you understand what they did, something quietly brilliant, you will never look at a piece of lumber the same way again. Pause for a moment and imagine if we could bring that forgotten knowledge back. Second, the hidden enemy and why modern builders misunderstand it. To uncover that lost technique, we must first correct the biggest misunderstanding in modern carpentry. Ask any builder today why wood rots and they will give the same answer: moisture. Water is the enemy. But that explanation is only half the truth and the wrong half. Water alone does not destroy wood. Rain does not hollow beams. Humidity does not turn lumber into dust. The real enemy is biological, and biology needs food. Fresh cut wood is not a neutral material. Inside every plank lies glucose, sucrose, hemicellulose, and simple carbohydrates, sweet, digestible sugars locked within the sap. To fungi, a fresh beam is not a structural element, it's a feast waiting for invasion. In 2020, the University of Copenhagen published a landmark study revealing a concept they called the fungal colonization threshold. They discovered that mold does not attack wood simply because it is wet. Moisture only activates the battlefield. What truly initiates decay is the availability of nutrients. Without sugars, fungi cannot establish themselves, even in damp environments. This means something game-changing. Moisture is a condition, not a cause. And this is exactly where modern lumber fails. Kiln drying removes water but leaves all the food behind. Chemical coatings cover the surface but do nothing to the interior. To fungi, modern wood is like a candy bar sealed in plastic, shiny on the outside, irresistible on the inside. But medieval builders understood something. Modern science is only now beginning to rediscover. They weren't fighting moisture. They were eliminating what fed the decay. And that shift in thinking changes everything. Third, archaeology reveals what textbooks forgot. For centuries, historians sensed that medieval timber had been prepared in a special way. Yet no surviving manual spelled out the method plainly. The answer didn't come from old books. It came from archaeology. When researchers analyzed oak beams recovered from the old London Bridge, they found something astonishing. Deep inside the wood, far deeper than rainwater or soil could ever reach, were trapped calcium and sodium residues. Not on the surface, not from flooding, but embedded within the wood fibers themselves. Further tests in the city of York uncovered traces of ash and ammonium sealed inside medieval roof timbers. These compounds cannot migrate naturally over time. Ash does not creep upward through wood. Ammonium does not seep inward simply from exposure. And then came the discovery from Stavanger, Norway. Inside the beams of centuries-old barns, scientists found chloride crystals lodged deep within the grain. Not near the exterior, not in the outer millimeters, but in the very heart of the wood. 3 regions, 3 structures, 3 sets of minerals that should not be there. The only logical conclusion was this: these timbers had been soaked deliberately before construction. They had been submerged in solutions lime water, brine, ash mixtures, or ammonia-rich liquids that penetrated deeply into the wood and changed it at a fundamental level. This was not accidental contamination, it was intentional engineering. Medieval builders weren't drying wood, they were bathing it. They weren't sealing the exterior, they were transforming the interior. And the technique they used quietly solved the mold problem centuries before anyone understood what mold actually was. The more we study medieval timber, the clearer the picture becomes. Beneath every surviving beam lies a story of chemistry without textbooks, biology without microscopes, and craftsmanship driven not by speed, but by results proven across centuries. 4. The timber dip, a Europe-wide technology. Once archaeologists uncovered the chemical fingerprints inside medieval timber, the next puzzle was even more surprising. This wasn't a forgotten trick used in one remote village or a rare specialty of master shipwrights. The deeper we looked, the more evidence pointed to something far more impressive. A continent-wide system. A technology so normalized that medieval builders didn't even think it needed explanation. The Guild records of England offer the first clue. In a carpentry regulation written nearly 700 years ago, there appears a simple instruction. Plankers shall be washed in lye or lime whiter. Not suggested required, lye or lime water, both strongly alkaline solutions, were to be used before boards were fitted into place. This wasn't decoration, it wasn't symbolic cleansing, it was engineering. Travel south to the monastic complexes of France, and you find a similar command scribbled into building accounts. Pieux submergés 8 jours. Piles must be submerged for 8 days. For monks who recorded everything with remarkable precision, the wording is clear. Wooden posts, especially those supporting floors and galleries, were intentionally soaked before installation. Not sprinkled, not rinsed, submerged. Even the rugged farmers of Scandinavia, far from the academic centers of Europe, wrote the same idea into their farm manuals. Instructions from Norway and western Sweden describe how builders should stockbade I saltvan, fur rising, logs bathed in salt water before the frame is raised. These were not seafarers treating ships. These were ordinary homesteaders preparing barn beams and house posts. Different languages, different climates, different cultures. Yet the same ritual appears everywhere. Soak the wood before you build. Patterns like this do not emerge by coincidence. They spread because they work, because results are visible across generations. While modern textbooks rarely mention it, medieval Europe quietly shared a unified technique, one refined over centuries and passed between builders not as secret knowledge, but as simple common sense. And when you view timber dipping, not as a mystery, but as a standard practice, the extraordinary longevity of medieval wood begins to make perfect sense. 5. The science of leaching, feeding fungi to death. To understand why soaking timber was so effective, we must step briefly into the world of material science. The heart of the process is something deceptively simple: leaching, the slow, steady removal of the sugars inside wood, the very nutrients that fungi depend on. When green oak or pine is first cut, its fibers are saturated with sap. Inside that sap lie hemicellulose compounds and simple carbohydrates. Hemicellulose dissolves even in weak solutions, breaking down under prolonged contact with water or alkaline baths. And once dissolved, those sugars begin to migrate. Slowly, invisibly, they diffuse outward from the inner grain toward the surface. In 2017, a team of researchers studying the sugar content in green oak, before and after immersion, found that soaking wood for several days dramatically reduced the available nutrient load within the fibers. They discovered that immersion doesn't just wash the surface, it drains the interior, pulling sap sugars outward through diffusion until the wood becomes biologically barren. The implications of this are extraordinary. Fungi can colonize wood only when nutrients remain above a certain threshold. Shift the balance enough, remove enough sugar, and the wood becomes an environment where decay organisms simply cannot thrive. Think of it this way. Ordinary lumber is a dinner plate. Soaked, leached lumber is a desert. No matter how much moisture touches it, no matter how warm or humid the environment becomes, there is simply nothing inside for fungi to eat. And without food, they cannot gain a foothold. This is why medieval timber ages so gracefully. The soaking process didn't just treat the surface or add a protective coat. It altered the internal chemistry of the wood. It starved decay before decay ever had a chance to begin. When you hold a medieval beam, you are holding a piece of wood that has been biologically emptied, a material engineered to deny life to the organisms that would destroy it. This is survival architecture at its purest, shaping the environment inside the wood so the enemy cannot exist. Sixth, creating hostility, a multi-front attack. But medieval builders didn't stop at starving fungi. Leaching removed the food source, yes, but the soaking solutions themselves launched an attack on several biochemical fronts. Each region used whatever materials were available, yet the effects are remarkably consistent. They created an environment so hostile that microbes had no chance. Lime water, one of the most common solutions, delivered a powerful pH shock. Wood submerged in lime absorbs calcium compounds that later react with natural tannins, especially abundant in oak to form calcium tannate, a substance remarkably resistant to fungal enzymes. This is not folklore. It is chemistry, centuries ahead of its time. Salt water, used across coastal regions from England to Norway, worked differently. Brine infiltrated the grain and disrupted fungal cells through osmotic collapse. Salt attracts moisture, pulling water out of microbial cells until they shrivel and die. A beam soaked in brine becomes a microscopic battlefield where mold cannot gain ground. Then there was urine, yes, urine used especially in monastic and rural settings. As it ages, urine produces ammonia, a natural compound capable of denaturing proteins and disabling enzymes crucial for fungal growth. For medieval builders, this wasn't waste. It was a potent biological weapon. And in regions rich in agriculture, fermented plant solutions introduced acids and alcohols, breaking down microbial structures and creating yet another layer of biochemical defense. Medieval craftsmen didn't need to understand molecular diagrams to see the results. They simply watched which beams lasted longest and refined their methods over generations. Even Viking shipbuilders followed similar logic. Analysis of the Oseberg ship timbers revealed chloride and acetate residues deep inside the wood, evidence of soaking in and fermented mixtures to withstand decades of ocean moisture. Across Europe, different mixtures, different recipes, but always the same goal: make the interior of the beam uninhabitable. And they succeeded so thoroughly that their structures still stand today, while our chemically coated lumber struggles to endure a single human lifetime. Medieval builders didn't rely on magic. They relied on biological warfare, executed with nothing more than water, patience, and materials every village had in abundance. 7. The oak tannin engine, Europe's secret superpower. There is another piece of this puzzle that often goes unnoticed. While medieval builders soaked many kinds of timber, one wood in particular seemed almost designed for this ancient method: oak. What made oak so extraordinary wasn't just its strength or density, but something hidden within its fibers: tannins. These natural compounds, bitter and reactive, play a remarkable role when paired with lime water. When oak is submerged in lime, calcium from the solution binds with the tannins inside the wood, forming a new substance called calcium tannate. Think of it as a protective shield the wood builds from its own chemistry. A layer that resists fungal enzymes, slows down moisture penetration, and reinforces the internal structure. Medieval builders didn't know the molecular details, but they saw the results. Oak treated with lime didn't just survive, it endured. One of the most striking examples stands beneath the roof of Chartres Cathedral in France. Its magnificent attic, built almost entirely of oak, has stood for centuries despite harsh weather, constant humidity shifts, and the sheer weight of its structure. Tests performed on surviving beams revealed traces of lime-related minerals deep inside, indicating that the timber had been soaked before assembly. The result? A roof so resilient it became known as the forest, a silent monument to the hidden chemistry medieval craftsmen mastered. This wasn't magic, it was synergy, the perfect pairing of a material rich in natural tannins with a treatment that activated them. Europe did not just inherit strong wood, it engineered it. 8. The step that matters most: seasoning. Yet even after soaking, one final step mattered more than any modern builder expects: the drying phase. Not the rapid, forced kiln drying used today, but slow seasoning, patient, deliberate, and often lasting months. Modern science has proven what medieval builders already understood. Slow drying reduces internal stress in wood by nearly 60%. When timber dries too quickly, as it does in industrial kilns, the outer layers contract before the inner ones can adjust. This creates tension, tiny fractures, and micro cracks, perfect gateways for fungal invasion. Those splits may be invisible to the eye, but to decay organisms they are open doors. Medieval builders avoided this entirely. After soaking, they stacked beams in shaded, windy courtyards, often raising them off the ground on stone supports. Timber was arranged so air could flow between each piece, allowing the wood to release moisture gradually without warping. Monastic orders, such as the Cistercians, perfected these timber stacks. They arranged boards in alternating directions, separated by thin wooden spaces, forming neat geometric towers that controlled airflow with precision. The goal was simple: dry the wood slowly, evenly, and without rush. To medieval craftsmen, time was not an obstacle. It was part of the material. And by giving timber the months it needed to stabilize, they locked in the benefits of the soak, preserved the structural integrity, and created beams that could bear the weight of centuries. Soaking prepared the wood. Seasoning completed the transformation. Ninth, microclimate control, the secret few. Notice. There is one final secret that explains why medieval timber survived environments where modern wood quickly fails. It has less to do with what builders did and more to do with what the treated wood became. Once soaked and slowly seasoned, medieval beams gained something precious: moisture inertia, the ability to resist sudden changes in internal humidity. Fungi thrive when moisture levels inside wood fluctuate between 40 and 90%. It is the swings, not the steady state, that awaken decay. Modern houses, with their sealed walls and drywall interiors, create exactly these rapid shifts. A rainstorm, a shower, a burst of indoor heat, each event pushes moisture in and out of untreated lumber, giving fungi the dynamic environment they need to grow. But medieval timber behaved differently. The soaking removed sugars, the minerals altered the internal chemistry, and the slow drying stabilized the grain. The result was wood that absorbed and released water far more slowly. Its internal humidity changed with the rhythm of seasons, not the rhythm of daily life. A medieval hall filled with smoke and breath experienced huge environmental changes, yet its beams barely reacted. Meanwhile, a modern drywall home can shift its internal moisture content by tens of micrograms of water per gram of cellulose within hours. In scientific terms, one environment created turbulence inside the wood, the other created stability. And stability is the enemy of decay. This is the quiet brilliance of the medieval method. By controlling the microclimate inside the timber, builders made decay biologically impossible. The world around the beam could change as violently as it wanted. Inside, everything stayed calm. Medieval wood didn't just resist mold, it ignored it. 10th, industrialization, the beginning of forgetfulness. The moment industrialization arrived, everything that made medieval wood last began to vanish. Not because the old methods failed, but because they no longer fit into a world that worshipped speed. When steam-powered sawmills, rail-delivered timber, and factory schedules took over Europe and America, the idea of soaking wood for days or drying it for months became unthinkable. Time, once an ally, suddenly became the enemy. Kiln drying replaced slow seasoning. Chemical preservatives replaced mineral soaking. And builders began treating wood the way we treat most modern problems, by coating the exterior and hoping the inside takes care of itself. But that was the breaking point. Industrial woodworking focused on appearance and surface protection, while medieval builders had focused on internal transformation. A kiln can dry a beam in hours, but it cannot remove the sugars inside. A chemical spray can waterproof the surface, but it cannot change the biological environment at the core. No matter how many coats of copper-based treatment or resin sealant are applied, the interior remains what fungi want most: food. That is the truth most modern construction manuals avoid addressing, and it leads to a simple but devastating conclusion. Chemical treatment coats wood. Medieval treatment transforms it. In the rush for efficiency, we traded longevity for convenience. We embraced processes that saved days but cost centuries. And without realizing it, we abandoned a method that once made timber nearly immortal. 11. Modern case studies, proving the old masters right. Evidence of medieval brilliance doesn't end in dusty archives or crumbling monasteries. Modern restoration projects have given us some of the most striking comparisons yet. Side-by-side tests where centuries-old beams outperform lumber that was supposedly state-of-the-art. In Germany, during a 2011 restoration of a medieval house built around the year 1320, workers removed a damaged beam and replaced it with new timber treated with modern chemicals. 4 decades later, inspectors discovered something shocking. The original 700-year-old beam was still structurally sound, while the replacement from 1970 had already begun to rot. The medieval timber had been soaked, seasoned, and prepared. The modern one had been rushed. Far north in Norway, UNESCO preservation teams studying stave churches found the same pattern. The base logs of one church, built in 1180, showed chloride and salt residues deep inside the wood. These logs had been soaked in brine before construction. More than 8 centuries later, they remain intact despite relentless frost, meltwater, and coastal humidity. And the science continues to confirm what the builders of old seemed to know by instinct. A 2022 microscopic analysis showed that fungal hyphae, the tiny threads that spread decay, cannot penetrate calcium tannate complexes formed in lime-treated oak. It is not a barrier. It is a fortress, one created from the wood's own chemistry. Every case study tells the same story. Medieval timber does not merely survive, it wins battles against time that modern wood loses with alarming ease. And each piece of evidence points back to the same forgotten truth. The builders of the past didn't guess. They observed, experimented, refined, and mastered techniques we are only now beginning to understand. 12. How to apply the system today without romanticizing. Bringing these methods back into the modern world is not about nostalgia. It is about practicality, recovering an approach that is scientifically sound, achievable with simple tools, and extremely effective. But it requires the right mindset. We shouldn't try to copy medieval formulas word for word. We should follow their logic. For anyone working on the shed, barn, cabin, or restoration project, the first step is preparing the soak. A basic lime bath can be made by mixing hydrated lime into water, letting it settle, and using the clear solution above the sediment. A pH meter helps ensure the mixture remains strongly alkaline. For a brine soak, dissolve non-iodized salt until the water reaches saturation, forming a solution fungi cannot tolerate. To know whether the leaching is working, watch the water. As sugars diffuse out of the wood, the soak becomes cloudy, what some researchers call wood milk, a sign that the sap is being drawn from the grain. Only when the cloudiness fades between water changes do you know the major nutrients have been removed. If full immersion isn't possible, repeated washes with ash water or lime solutions can still be surprisingly effective, especially when followed by proper seasoning. Seasoning, however, is the part most modern builders neglect. To mimic medieval slow drying, stack the wood in a shaded, airy place with spaces between each piece. Keep it off the ground, away from direct sun, and allow the wind to do the work. This can take weeks or months, depending on thickness, and that patience is exactly what makes the method succeed. The real goal is to combine all 3 stages: remove the nutrients, create biochemical hostility, and stabilize the wood's moisture response. You don't need to replicate a monastery, you just need to replicate a system. And once you think in systems, not shortcuts, timber begins to last again. 13. The lost philosophy. Before you build, you prepare. In the end, the most important lesson isn't chemical, archaeological, or even biological. It is philosophical. Medieval builders believed something we have completely forgotten. Durability is not added later, it is engineered from the beginning. They didn't build fast, they built well. They didn't rely on warranties, they relied on wisdom. And they trusted the simple idea that materials treated with care, time, and understanding could outlast the people who shaped them. That is the heart of this story. And it is why medieval beams still hold roofs that were built before the world even resembled the one we know. Every surviving cathedral attic, every preserved barn, every timber hall that still stands is a quiet reminder of what long-term thinking once achieved. So as you look at modern building materials lined up on store shelves, shining with marketing promises and chemical labels, ask yourself which one you trust more: something that has survived 800 years, or something that comes with a 5-year warranty. History isn't telling us to go backward, it's telling us to pay attention, to learn from what has endured, not from what is convenient. And if we can reclaim even a fraction of that lost mindset, the structures we build today might finally become worthy of the centuries again.